Welcome to WagerTalk TV, everyone. I am Minty Beth, your host, here with Dave Koken. Follow him on Twitter at Dave Koken. And Ralph Michaels, follow him on Twitter at CalSportsLV. We're talking college football this Saturday. The Houston Cougars at the Baylor Bears. Bears favored by 4.5 points at the moment, and the total is set at 63. Ralph, let's start with you. This is the first time both teams are playing this season, so what can we see here?
It is. And Dave, I want to ask you a quick question before we start. This is one of those games. The Circa opened up Baylor 10.5. One bet brought it down to 8.5. One bet brought it down to 7.5. I actually grabbed it in a half, released it. It stayed 7.5 for a day or two, and now it's down to 4.5. But my power rating number is basically pick 'em. So there's times where I want to disagree with the statement that if you don't get the best of the line, no value in playing the game. Whereas compared to my power rating, what I made the number, there's still 4.5 points value. So it's a little different than that statement. Your quick thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of twofold. One is that I'll jot down the first openers, but I don't really consider them to be the opening lines, because if one bet can bring it down, who's to say whether it was a sharp better, a recreational better, and what were the limits? What I want is a more widely available number, first number to look at, and that's what I consider the opening line. So, for instance, in this game, I made the opening line 7.5. I'm not as concerned with the value aspect on even the true opening line as I am after the number's really gotten some play. So that Monday morning line or mid-Monday line, to me, that's your true line that you should be looking at. You can't talk yourself off games because you're not getting the absolute best number that was out there if that absolute best number really wasn't available to anyone.
Good point.
True stuff. Yeah, all right, Ralph, so what do you think of this game? Where are you leaning? What are you betting?
Well, obviously, like I said, I released it at WagerTalk at 7.5. I took it down now because of the line move, but I also still bet it on the money line. I think Houston wins this game. Baylor, only 9 returning starters, the fewest experience in college football. You have a new head coach in Arnada. You got a new offense. You got a new defense. You lost 9 of your top 11 tacklers. On the flip side, Holgorsen with Houston is one of the most experienced teams, 19 returning starters. And he talked about how he handpicked the JUCOs he wanted to bring in, top of 18 starters, everyone that he wanted. You have a situation where Houston is very excited to play Baylor. In Baylor's depth chart that they opened last week before the game got canceled, they only returned 9 starters, 2 on defense. Yeah. They were missing 4 starters off their opening depth chart, so they may potentially only have 5 returning starters here. I think Houston, this game is a pick 'em in my mind, and I think Houston wins outright.
Wow, love it. All right, Dave, do you agree or disagree?
This game's going to be a learning experience. It's going to be a learning experience for me. The one thing that Ralph didn't mention on Baylor, which is an additional negative, is they had no spring practices. Now, It's one thing with a really experienced team to have no spring practices. For instance, North Carolina was a program that had no spring practices and even had some sessions missing in August. And they kind of showed it in the first half against Syracuse. Then they got it together. But that's a really experienced team on offense with a great deal of talent. Baylor, we don't know what their situation is because they lost so many people on defense. And they bring in a new coach as well. And even though I don't think there's any dramatic changes that are taking place in terms of philosophy, it's still a new voice, a new chain of command on the sidelines. And I think for teams with new coaches, not getting any spring practices in can be a negative, plus the fact that it's been a little bit disjointed for Baylor since they've returned. The other thing to factor in here is just how bad the Big 12 was last week. Iowa State, outright loser. Kansas State, outright loser. Texas Tech barely holds on against an FCS team. Pretty good FCS team, but still an FCS team. Not exactly the way you want to see a conference start the season. I am not a big fan of the AAC either. I think it's an overrated league. I've made money picking against teams in this league when they go out of conference the last couple of years, but I'm not comfortable on the Baylor side here. My number, for what it's worth, I made Baylor 5.5 in my power rating. So it's right about where it's supposed to be. But I think this is a game I want to see more than anything from the standpoint of what can I learn about these two teams. Is Baylor going to be as opportunistic, I think is the right word, as they were last year? Baylor was never as good as their record indicated last year. They were extraordinarily well coached. I thought they might have been the best coached team in college football last year. And their poise was remarkable. There were a couple of games last year where they ended up with third and fourth string quarterbacks in the field because Brewer was hurt. And you would have thought they had a starter on the field. That had a lot to do with the coaching and his tremendous confidence in his backups because he really didn't change his offense a great deal. I don't know if you get the same thing here. My lean, for what it's worth, would be Houston. I don't think it's a game that'll be on my card, though.
Ralph, I know you have something to say here to what Dave said.
I do. A little T&A to finish this. You know, Dave brought up how well Baylor played in adverse situations. Well, that's why that coach is now in the NFL. Number two, first-year college football head coaches in this COVID season, 2-8 ATS. Oh, yeah, by the way, first-year NFL rookie head coaches, Cleveland, Carolina, and the Giants, 0-3 ATS. So new head coaches in both leagues, now 2-11 ATS. Dave also brought up the no practice.
Well, Ralph, I was going to interrupt and say that clearly ties in. I don't think there's any question that it's no coincidence that this ties in with the lack of preparation the new coaches have had in terms of putting things together in their schemes and their philosophies and knowing their talent. Even if they were with the team in the prior season, I still think there's a difficult transition. It's difficult to begin with, but this has made it a lot tougher.
No question. And you mentioned practices. Baylor, 0 spring practices. Right. Houston had 8. When teams are both playing their first game and one team had at least 5 more practices than their opponent, they are 7-3 ATS, 70% as well. So both of those new COVID angles fit the situation for Houston.
All righty, good stuff. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Get $10 to use at WagerTalk.com and SportsMemo.com. Join our text club. Text WagerTalk at 33222 and SportsMemo at 33222 to get $10 at both sites. Thanks for watching.